Hello everybody, it is a wonderful day because Code Interpreter is finally here. It's hard to believe that I just made a video on like a workaround for this not even a few weeks ago. It hasn't even been a full month yet, and in that video I said that hopefully the method that I was showing you guys wouldn't be outdated by the time a full month came around, and unfortunately I was wrong, because sitting here in front of me today is in fact the released version of Code Interpreter available to the public, the official version released by OpenAI. So this is not a workaround, this is Code Interpreter. Okay, so a quick rundown if you haven't heard of Code Interpreter or you're not sure what it is yet, or if this is your first time hearing about it. Essentially what Code Interpreter is a AI version of a data analyst. Essentially what it does is it allows you to provide a CSV file, or we will test to see if it can handle an Excel file, and it will analyze that data and provide insights to you based on what it finds. So Code Interpreter's objective is to dig deeper into your data and see what it is that you can't see on the surface. Since everything we do with AI on this channel is looking at things from a small business perspective, that's once again the type of direction we're going to be taking with this video. I do also want to do a little bit of a comparison between what Code Interpreter can do and what Notable AI can do, the previous method that I showed you guys. So in the previous video where I showed how we could do data analysis inside of ChatGPT, there were a lot of requirements that you needed in order to pull that off. This time around, it's actually not too bad. The main thing that you need is the GPT Plus membership. And the reason why you need the ChatGPT Plus membership is because it gives you access to ChatGPT 4, which is not just a new model for you, but it also has access to web browsing, plugins, and now Code Interpreter. So if you have that, what you want to do is you want to go to your ChatGPT page, go down here to your account, click on Settings, Beta Features, and then if you have gotten Code Interpreter given to you by OpenAI, you should have this down here, which lets you basically toggle it on and off. But if you don't see this and you are a ChatGPT Plus member, just be advised that this is being rolled out this week. So if you're seeing this video like 1 or 2 days after it's released, or even the day of, it's possible that it hasn't been given to you yet, and that's okay. You'll have it by next week for sure. So obviously you want to make sure that this is toggled on if you do have it. Another requirement that I mentioned in the previous video that has kind of changed going into this method is the idea of having a properly formatted data set. Now the reason that that was so important in the Notable video was because you were providing that to a tool that was specifically required to deal with datasets. It's an inherently data analysis tool. While Code Interpreter kind of does the same thing, you have to understand that it's also paired with the knowledge of ChatGPT 4 and the critical thought that comes with it. It's able to consider the objective and what the main goal is aside from just analyzing the data like our Notable plugin workaround method was. But then again, that doesn't mean that you should just be providing random data to ChatGPT and expecting it to be able to just figure it out. I'm not sure if it can reorganize data or how much it can actually influence these files, if at all. I don't believe that it can, so asking it to reorganize the data in a way that's legible is not really practical, and that's something that we're also going to explore just a little bit in this video. And while we're on that topic of going above and beyond so that the model can perform effectively, I also talked in the previous video about how important prompting was and giving it the proper context and environment for it to reach the goal. And now, as I said, Code Interpreter is paired with the knowledge of ChatGPT 4, but that also doesn't mean that you should just be providing bare bones questions to ChatGPT 4 and expecting it to read your mind. If there's a very niche question about your data or a very specific thing that it wouldn't be able to deduct reasonably, you have to provide it that additional context. If it's something specific about your business or the data set, let it know and it will make it easier for it to do its job. So it's still important to have a decently formatted data set and to provide a good prompt to ChatGPT 4, but it's definitely not as needed as it was in the Notable method. So without further ado, let's get into it, because that's really all I have to say. Believe it or not, there's really not that long of an intro this time. So again, if you have this thing enabled, settings, and the ChatGPT 4, you're going to want to create a new thread, come over to ChatGPT 4, click on Code Interpreter. So what I wanted to do is give it a sample file, the same sample file that we did last time. So this is our sample CSV for YouTube. In the previous video, it was just it's a small data set basically of companies and profit versus expenses, things like that, things of that nature. So, because again, we're coming at this from a small business perspective. Okay, so we're going to start this off with a very basic question. As I said, you don't have to be as specific with this data analysis method just because of ChatGPT's deductive reasoning. So we're just going to ask something simple like, what is this data set, and ask it to describe it to us. Wow, that was extremely fast. So here's what it has to report. That the dataset appears to be a record of projects managed by different companies. Each row in the datasets represents an individual project, along with the columns providing additional information about each. These are 100% the variables that are within the dataset. If we look at it here, this is actually the dataset that was provided to ChatGPT. So we can see company, start date, end date, number of days. And then if we come over here, company, start date, end date, number of days, so on and so forth. It's able to recognize the fact that one of the columns is a binary indicator, indicating a yes or no based on a 1 or a 0, which is really interesting. This is something that we had to tell it before when we described what all our variables were. So it seems like ChatGPT has a pretty good understanding of what the dataset is. So from there, you can adjust kind of what it said. If it said something that seemed a little bit off, or if it was on the right path, you can give it some adjustments so that it can understand better what the variable is. Because once again, if you just say continue, 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 there's a good chance it's going to mess something up. And that's definitely not something you want when you're trying to make informed business decisions based on what it's providing you. But that's a whole nother discussion that I've actually talked about in my last video about myths regarding AI and small business endeavors. I mentioned that you actually have to critically think about what the AI is saying. Just because it's extremely smart and is smarter than the average person, or just because it is smarter than the average person, doesn't mean that you should be taking everything that it says for fact. It can hallucinate. There are things that it says that sound really convincing, but it's not based in facts at all. And the same concept applies here. Don't be lazy and read only the first part of what it's saying. Fully read and comprehend what it is that it's telling you. Okay, now that we know that it has a really good understanding of the data set, and I don't feel the need to adjust anything because everything that it said was correct, we can go ahead and ask it if it could do some basic analysis on the data to see if it could gather any insights. And again, this is a very bare bones prompt, right? This is like asking anybody to create a marketing campaign for you with absolutely no additional information. Oh, interesting. It seems that there's been an error. Well, and this isn't something that we should be concerned about. I mean, we saw this with the Notable plugin. The Notable plugin has its own issues in regard to reading the data set, but this is really interesting. It's actually been able... It messed it up twice? I'm confused. Okay, so it seems like it had a little bit of an issue, but it's been able to correct itself here. Okay, so we're identifying the data types for each column, which is typically one of the first things that a data analyst will do. They'll go through and look at the data and see what it is. So at the surface level, it doesn't seem like what it's doing right now is actually valuable in any way, but it takes time to get to a point where the data analysis is actually valuable. For example, I had a teacher back in high school who used to make us write, God, I can't even remember how many pages. It was 12 pages front and back on thin ruled paper, and the objective of the project was for us to think deeper. He would give us something to write about. It could be a single word, or it could be a YouTube video, a TED Talk, a quote, and we had to write 12 pages on each subject that he gave us. What this taught us was to dig deeper and to think critically about what we're looking at and see if maybe there's any additional meaning to it. The same type of concept applies here. The whole point of data analysis is to dig through your data. It takes time and it takes a great wealth of data in order to be able to do something that provides you an actual direction to act on. Okay, so going back and looking at what it said, it seems like we got a pretty good analysis here, some general information. I mean, these graphs, here we go, out of one very general prompt, we were able to get 5 different graphs. And they're not fantastic. They don't necessarily tell us a whole lot like some of the other notable AI graphs did. On top of that, it was also able to look further into the data and analyze, based off of this, what type of data type it is and how that would affect the data analysis down the road if certain ones are a data type that they shouldn't be. For example, it says that the dates are in a string format, and that usually it's a good idea to convert them to date time for any time series related analysis, which is absolutely true. So that's something that we could definitely tell it to go ahead and do, and it should be able to do that. So it's definitely able to provide some general food for thought for us to think about, especially coming at this from a business owner perspective. So the data set that I provided to it is not based on any real data. It's completely false. It's fake. It's manufactured. But there are still based in plausibility, right? Like the data set I provided isn't entirely hypothetical, it could happen. And so based on that, we can get some pretty interesting things to think about. For example, it says that the average project duration is about 40 days with a standard deviation of 41 days. The shortest project taking 2 days and the longest taking 120. So again, this is something that you could get just looking at your data, but if you have, thousands of rows of something like this, it would definitely be easier for ChatGPT to tell you all the keynotes rather than you going and doing it yourself. It says that the average number of days is -2, indicating that on average projects are completed a bit late, but it also says that this is influenced by a significant standard deviation of about 12 days. Now this is really important to note because if you read just this as a manager, for example, this tells you a very different picture than all of this together. This first half is a problem, the second half is a solution or a direction. It also gives us a lot of information about how much we earned both before and after expenses, but it's not too impressive considering the fact that this data is, provided to it really. It just has to sum or average these. It also provides some more information about each project in terms of companies, in terms of expense percentages, stating that the expense percentages may vary across projects. And it also tells us exactly what these expense values are. And as we can see, they're pretty out there. Some are 5, and it goes as high as 23%, which can be a lot for a single project, at least in this specific case. So once again, even though this is just a general question, it still tells you some pretty good information and a direction to look at least. It does this for pretty much every relevant variable in the dataset, which is extremely interesting. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all this information and we're going to put it in quotes. We're just going to ask it, could you please act on the information above? And then we're also going to ask it to continue its analysis. So as you can see, not a terribly big prompt. We'll also add to visualize the information you find as well. So once again, not a very big prompt. Let's see what we get out of this. Okay, so now we've got some pretty intense information here. This is something that we did not see out of Notable, but this we definitely did. So this correlation heat map is, again, like I mentioned, something that we saw in the Notable workaround. It pretty much tells you the correlation between each variable with other variables. So a correlation of 1 means that they're very highly correlated. A negative correlation means that it's, I believe, inversely correlated or in something like that. I'm not a data analyst, excuse me, which is why we're using ChatGPT. So again, I'm not ashamed to admit that I don't fully understand what this means, but we can ask ChatGPT to go ahead and explain the correlation map further if it hasn't already, which it did. And that's also what's really nice about this, is that it provides you further information about what the graphs are. And that's not to say that the Notable AI workaround didn't, it still did, but I'm curious to see how these differ, basically. So once again, when we're looking at specific things that you should notice in terms of differences between the two methods is this specific statement right here. So ChatGPT mentions that there's a strong positive correlation between before expenses and after all expense prices, and it also states that this is to be expected as both are related to the total income for the project. And again, this is something that you'd probably be able to reasonably tell yourself, but the whole point of this is to take the workload off of your mind and allow it to do the analysis for you. All you have to do is read it and comprehend what it's saying. Oh, you're still here. Okay, cool. If you're here, you were one of the people that decided to keep watching, and thank you for that. And because of that, we're going to do what I said we'd do at the beginning of the video, and that is test and see if it can actually load Excel files. I believe that this is an Excel file. Like I said, we're going to see if it can load an Excel file and read it. So the Excel file we're giving it is a analysis of Twitch streamers that I was doing for something. I will not be explaining what that is. 200 different streamers with links. We're just going to see if it can read it and basically figure out what's going on here. We also have some additional stuff here to the side. So going back to our conversation about having a properly formatted data set, if we got rid of this, it would be just fine. But having this in here might mess with it. So I'm really curious to see how that works. Okay, so we're just going to grab this. throw it in there. All right, well, it seems to have loaded. Okay, we're gonna ask it to do some basic analysis on this data set, and we'll see what it can do. I'm really curious. Okay, it's also able to reasonably look at this data set. So again, this is an Excel file. What we used earlier was a CSV file. So CSVs are usually used for data analysis, but Excel files work too. I typically prefer to work in Excel files in terms of actually entering data and then maybe converting them to a CSV file for something like this. But if it can take either of them, I guess it doesn't really matter. Okay, well, we also have this down here, unnamed 13, unnamed 20. So obviously we would have to get rid of this stuff, and it seems like it didn't read what's happening here. Yeah, it didn't even read it. Okay, so I mean, it's definitely doing the analysis. It just ignored what we have going on here, but that's okay. I think that's kind of expected. I think anybody would ignore that. It's more of like, did it acknowledge what this says? Okay, there's also, while it's typing this out, because obviously it seems to have a pretty good understanding of what's happening here, I want to ask it, could you please create a report that summarizes... Okay, so we're just going to ask it if it could please create a report that summarizes all the information as if it was to present it to an executive. I asked it to provide visuals and to format it as if its job was on the line. So let's see what it can do with that. Okay, wow, so it was actually able to make the report. Let's take a look. Oh, wow. Okay, so we got some issues here with the actual file, but this is really good. This is pretty good. I mean, it would still maybe need some bolding here, but not bad, ChatGPT, not bad at all. Very impressive. Everything that we've done here thus far is extremely doable by a human, but it's the fact that we've been able to do it in, I don't know, 15 minutes versus what would take hours and a lot of brain power and energy. So as we can see, there's obviously a huge value to code interpreter, and I guess in this basic analysis we can't really tell how different it is from the notable pipeline that we talked about, but there's definitely more value using this method in the fact that it's quicker, it's easier, but the value in terms of notable is the fact that you actually have that data there for you to edit and adjust as needed. What I mentioned in the last video and in my myths video is the fact that AI is best when paired with human ingenuity and human creativity. While it may take longer, data analysis by a human may provide more insight, or at least a human professional may provide more insight than ChatGPT would. So the benefit of notable versus this is the fact that you had all that code available for you so that you could give it to a professional data analyst. And on the surface level, it doesn't seem like there's any code here that we can adjust, but really all we have to do is ask ChatGPT to give it to us. So all we have to ask is for it to give us the code for everything we have done so far, and it'll give us the entire Python code that it's run. And so obviously this would need some adjustment, particularly in where it's reading the data set, because if we see this directory isn't applicable everywhere depending on where you're loading this data set from. And it's also important to note what this is. In the notable video and in the myths video, I mentioned the fact that when you're giving data to a company like OpenAI, this data isn't getting put in liminal space. Everything that you're doing with ChatGPT is getting logged, it is getting recorded, and a lot, if not all of it, is getting used to retrain the models. Now, I believe there were some talks for a while about ChatGPT and OpenAI possibly releasing a business version that does not save any of the data, it does not collect data on what you're providing, it is only the tool itself. And if that's the case, and if code interpreter's in it, then by all means, I think there will still be some fine line and some fine printing there as well though. So again, we got to think critically. And in terms of thinking critically, as this stands right now, this is some pretty cool stuff, and I'd be really interested to see how this is going to be applied later on, especially with API. I'm curious to see if this will even be provided in the API version of ChatGPT, and if it is, that is going to be absolutely absurd. So there's a lot that you can do with this, and I wanted to keep this video as short as possible, but still provide you guys some insight and some actual value. And again, this is a very bare bones example. I didn't even provide it a real data set. So ultimately, be careful, be ethical with how you use this technology, but it's certainly really cool and you shouldn't be afraid of it, and you should definitely embrace it. But yeah, that is all I have. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe, and please feel free to tune in to my series that I'm doing right now as we speak. I'm probably editing it as we speak. It's an 8-part course that covers different elements of integrating AI into your business, such as navigating different tools. As I mentioned, we covered myths in our last video. We're covering the difference between different ChatGPT tools like ChatGPT and ChatGPT API. We're also talking about other AI tools and how ChatGPT is being integrated into those and how you can look through all those tools and determine what actually has value to you. So yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff. I hope you guys will enjoy it. And again, that's all I have. So I will hopefully see you guys around. Bye bye.